All right, how's that? All right, welcome. We are delighted to have Dr. Chad Rose present today. I'm going to do a very brief introduction to our grant and introduce our scholars, and then I'll introduce Dr. Rose, and then I'll turn the mic over to him. My name is Julia Ogg, and I'm one of the project directors for the Project Prevent and Address Bullying Behavior Across All Tiers, or PPABB, along with Dr. Michelle Demaray, Dr. Woody Johnson, and Dr. Christine Malecki. And we are thrilled to be able to have Dr. Rose on campus with us today. I'm going to briefly just mention what PPABB is all about. And before I get into that, I want to also mention we are streaming this talk. So those of you who are in the audience, I just wanted you to be aware of that. So the PPABB project, the goal is to recruit, train, and graduate scholars in the area of special education and school psychology. And in those areas, we often get a little bit of an introduction to bullying and addressing bullying in schools. But the goal of this project was to train both special educators and school psychologists with more in-depth knowledge in that area. And we currently have 10 scholars in the program. And our scholars in the audience, so if you're a scholar, if you could please stand, their names are here. We have 5 special ed and 5 school psychology scholars. Thank you. We will be enrolling new scholars starting in the next admission cycle, so if you're interested, I've got our website at the end. So just a little quick blurb about what our grant is all about. There are 5 different components. The first component is a seminar that's focused on bullying, and in that class, the scholars learn more specific information about definitions of bullying, theories of bullying, and interventions to address bullying across the tiers within school settings. The other elements of the project are coursework in the psychology department, in tiered mental health services, as well as coursework in the special education department in applied behavior analysis. And so one really cool thing about the project is that we are bringing together scholars in school psych and special education, so they have an opportunity to work together prior to going out into the field. And as part of that, they're doing shared assignments. They're also doing a shared practicum where they're partnered and applying what they're learning out in the schools. The fourth element is what we're here for today. That's our expert consultant, Dr. Rose. In addition to his talk today, he's also been working with us on developing our syllabi, and he'll continue to work with us and meet with our scholars throughout the grant period. And then the last component is kind of getting our scholars opportunities outside the walls of NIU. So our scholars will have opportunities to both present and learn at statewide and national conferences in their areas of school psychology and special education, as well as research more specific to bullying. So that's just a little blurb. If you have any questions or want to learn more, this is our website, so please check it out. So I'm going to do a brief introduction for Dr. Rose, and I mentioned this earlier today, but just a few days ago, a picture popped up in my memories of the first time Dr. Demaray, Dr. Malecki, and I met Dr. Rose, which is at the Alberti Bullying Conference back in 2016. He was giving one of the presentations, and we learned about his research focusing on bullying among kids with disabilities. And so it was really a nice opportunity to get to meet him, and we were able to present with him at the American Psychological Association conference in 2017. Dr. Rose is a faculty member at the University of Missouri and the director of the Mizzou Bullying Prevention Lab. He's a prolific scholar in the area of bullying among kids with disabilities, with over 60 presentations and several really large grants focused on this. And we're so excited to have him. He also brings in experience as a special education teacher, and that he can bring kind of that real life experience into his research. So I will turn the floor over to you, Dr. Rose. Thank you and welcome.
There we go. So I'm excited to be here. That picture brought back memories from the APA conference. I'm sure he's not watching the live stream, but Tom Farmer was in there. And at that conference, he stood up and respectfully disagreed with the presentation that I gave before. And so he's one of the nicest people I know, and it was the best way to have a scholarly disagreement, I think. And he and I had a long conversation about it afterwards. And at some point we'll talk about it, but we were talking about the difference between social and communication skill acquisition versus reputation development. So which one comes first, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, I'm excited to be here. This is my first time on campus, even though I got my PhD from the University of Illinois. I have a lot of respect for the faculty here. I've known you all for several years now, and I am excited that to be here following the last grant where you all had my mentor, Dorothy Espelage, as the consultant. Today, we're going to get through, I also have to make sure that I keep on my mark. Today, we are going to get through a lot of slides very quickly. I'm sure that I'm not going to cover them all, but I will do my best. I created this title, and then when I went back to create the presentation, I realized that this title was way more broad than a presentation I could do in an hour. So we'll do the best we can. There we go, we're on. So my name is Chad Rose. I am the director of the Mizzou Ed Bully Prevention Lab. I'm also an associate professor, and I am the director of graduate studies in the Department of Special Education at the University of Missouri. I've been at Mizzou since 2013, so I'm starting my 9th year there. I've been studying bullying now for a little over 15 years, and I primarily focus on youth with disabilities and also predictive and protective factors, as well as interventions situated within a multi-tiered framework. So we'll go over all of those things today, maybe. So in my lab, the first thing that we do is policy evaluation. We work with states, schools, and districts on evaluating their bully prevention policy to ensure that it's in compliance with state and federal regulations, but also make sure that it's substantive enough to impact the lives of kids. One thing that I don't like is looking at policy that are compliance-only policies, meaning that they're just following the guidelines, but they're not really doing anything. The next thing we do is we have a series of trainings. I don't believe bullying begins and ends with school bells. Bullying is a community issue. So we have a series of trainings that we do that span from teachers to community members to educational professionals to parents to students. And the third thing we do is we do skill-based interventions. And we're going to get into that a little bit today. But I say skill-based interventions purposefully because I believe that walking into a school and telling kids bullying is bad, don't do it, does not work. So we focus on skill development. And we do all that to establish bully-free environments for all. And I say we also purposefully. My team consists of 8 graduate students, 8 doctoral level students right now, and about 10 undergraduate students. I may be the one that stands in front of you, but they're the ones that carry the load. I've been texting with them today. In between meetings, I call them to make sure everything goes okay. They're the ones that carry the load. They're doing a fantastic job in bringing all this to you. Okay, so today we're going to go through a couple of things. The first is establishing the context. Then we're going to go into some predictive and protective factors. And then what we're going to get into is our interventions. So I mentioned this before, but bullying no longer begins and ends with school bells. Now, bullying is entrenched within a kid's physical and electronic foundations and boundaries. So we have to address it from all angles. Now, if you see this statement right here, this is a statement, this is, I think, one of the first sentences I ever wrote as a graduate student. And it still rings true today. And the thing about this statement is, if you go up and talk to anyone in the streets or at the mall, wherever you are, and you ask them about bullying, they're going to mention some of these things. Whoops. Oh, man, it went away. That's why I don't like transitions. So they're going to mention that bullying is this social ritual, this hierarchy, a rite of passage. Right? I hear it all the time. Boys will be boys, girls will be girls, kids will be kids. Kids have to go through it. They have to endure it. It toughens them. It hardens them. It's not true. It's not true at all. It's not true. What toughens kids up and what supports kids are that support system around them to pull them out of these situations. Right? That's what helps kids. And I've actually surveyed and worked with tens of thousands of kids in my career. Never once have I met that kid that just says, I was born to bully. That was what my destiny was. I was born to be a bully. I've never met that kid. I've met kids that have been conditioned. I've met kids that have used aggressive behavior to serve a function, but I've never met kids that are just born to bully others. So from that angle, what I believe is if our school systems are going to be established as a hierarchical system, then why not empower those kids that are sitting on top of that hierarchy to believe bullying doesn't have to happen in their school? Why are we not doing that? So I think part of it is knowing how to do so. Another part of it is training our adults in the building to make sure that they have the skills necessary to empower these kids. And the third thing is we have to make sure we're sending the appropriate messages, right? One thing that I won't talk about, I'm getting ready to talk about it, but one thing I typically don't talk about, especially in public forums or when I'm interviewed, are all of the tragedies associated with bullying. Because we know, right? We know. We have an initiative in my lab to highlight the positive things schools and community members are doing in the area of bullying and bully prevention. That way we can show community members and parents and students and teachers and administrators that we are doing something and we're moving the needle in a positive direction. And as long as we get that messaging out, then we'll be in better shape. What that is all about. Oh, there, see? I had it. No, I don't. Oh. All right, so here's the definition. I don't want to spend too much time with this definition, but I do want to acknowledge the fact that when I talk about bullying, I am talking about a very specific type of behaviors. I'm talking about behaviors that are intentional, that have an imbalance, and that are repeated or likely to be repeated. Those are the behaviors I'm talking about. Okay? Now, from a perspective of justification, 1 in 5 youth experience high rates of victimization across this country. 1 in 5. Now, that's not including those populations of youth who are traditionally marginalized. It's not including youth with disabilities. That's just 1 in 5 in general. When we start talking about kids with disabilities, for example, we're talking about 1 in 3, 1 in 2. You know, there's a study out there that looked at kids with autism. It was like 97% were reporting experience victimization. That's a lot. And really, the reason why you all are here and the reason why the grant exists, the reason why my lab exists, the reason why, we do all these papers is because of these outcomes. No matter what your role or role affiliation involved in bullying, these are the outcomes. Psychosomatic outcomes. We have psychosocial outcomes, behavioral, social, educational, academic, all detrimental. And yeah, maybe it presents differently for kids that are more entrenched as victims versus those that engage in higher levels of perpetration, sure. But this spans everybody involved. And that's why we're here, right? Because these outcomes aren't great. Kids involved in bullying have worse academic outcomes. Kids who are victimized have more psychosomatic symptoms. They're less likely to want to come to school because they feel sick. So this is why we're here. So that's about all I'm going to say about that. Now, we spent a time earlier, for those of you who are watching, and for those of you who weren't there, I've been talking all day to the scholars, and we spent some time talking about extracurricular activities. But really, when we think about it, this idea of homophily, birds of a feather flock together. So kids that engage in like behaviors tend to flock with other kids who engage in like behaviors. The same with involvement in extracurricular activities. Kids that are interested in football tend to flock to football. Now, I certainly am not going to talk at length about the types, but I also want to acknowledge the fact that I'm talking about all these different types. With the exception, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about sexual bullying as some people have defined it, because it's more accurately defined as sexual harassment or sexual assault. Those things I'm not going to talk about. And the reason why is not that I don't want to talk about them, it's that they have different predictive and protective factors. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time trying to disentangle the two. But what I will talk about is this idea of what's not bullying. This is the question I get asked a lot. Everything's bullying. Why is everything bullying? And this is why I was intentional in defining what it is. These three behaviors are not bullying. The first one is instrumental aggression, I believe, yep. The first one is instrumental aggression. Instrumental aggression is aggression that appears necessary to protect oneself, one's friends, one's families, or one's belongings. The next one is retaliatory aggression. This is the call that most of us get in our schools from parents. Bullying was happening, or my son or daughter got bullied, but really just a fight broke out on the basketball court. It's the heat of the moment aggression, right? And the third one up here is jostling. This one is aggression or pretend aggression that's mutually reinforcing until it's not. This is that slap boxing or wrestling around in the hallways. This is that stuff that siblings do. They wrestle around. The thing is, kids don't know each other's threshold, right? So one kid will push the other kid too far, and a fight will break out. So I tell all teachers to stop this type of aggression, even though it looks mutually reinforcing. The other thing that I should be clear about is this idea that bullying is a dynamic process. So you'll hear me refer to it as the bullying dynamic a lot, and what I'm really referring to is the reciprocity between involvement, meaning that there has to be a perpetrator or behaviors that are predatory, and there has to be victimization or interpretation of victimization. It's cyclic. Now, this is something that we've been talking about for quite some time, and I think it's just now catching on. I think you guys did a paper on this, this idea that we used to believe that bullying was this linear process, right? This pure bully, pure victim. This idea that when you watch like Back to the Future or Karate Kid, everybody's seen those. I don't know. I'm getting older and older than my audience is lately, so like I have to get some new references. But that's essentially what we're talking about, right? This idea of a pure bully, pure victim. The thing is, if that were the case, if we were really talking about that type of behavior, that type of linear pattern, we would be able to intervene. We'd be able to do it, and our interventions would be more effective. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Our new view is the kids move in and out of roles based on time and context. And these roles are rarely static, like hard line static. But we all do it, right? We all move in and out of our social roles based on time and context. You all act differently in here than you do when you go hang out with your friends. I mean, I know I'm certainly acting differently now because I'm in a new social environment, talking to people that I've met but haven't had a lot of interaction with in comparison to my friends back home where we go and, prop up at the bar for a couple of hours. We all do it. And it's the same with kids. They move in and out of roles based on time and context. That's why interventions are so challenging, because some kids engage in a set of behaviors under one set of conditions and entirely another set of behaviors under a different set of conditions. Now, that's what also makes role affiliation so challenging. Because we no longer have this pure victim or this pure bully. We have subsets of these groups. We have kids that defend. We have kids that encourage. We have all sorts of kids that play roles within this dynamic process. Because bullying is a social construct. And I am a social ecologist. I believe that kids are born, and then when they're born, they have some level of genetics, right? But then they also learn their behaviors from their parents or from whatever family unit they are born into. Then they move into the school, and they learn behaviors from their peers and their teachers in the school environment, but also vicariously from their peers' families. We also know that some behaviors are more acceptable in different communities. And we also know society shapes our behaviors. Like, behaviors are more acceptable now than they were in the past. Like, for example, I was coming up when The Simpsons just started, the longest running sitcom in the nation's history. I was coming up at that point, and they used to have these t-shirts, Bart saying, underachiever and proud of it. Those shirts were banned in my school. You couldn't wear those shirts. Now, look at the stuff kids are wearing. And I don't, I'm not a prude or anything, but it's a lot different than me wearing a shirt with a cartoon character that says, I'm proud to be an underachiever. So our society shifts and change, and behaviors become either more or less acceptable. And, the thing that I hear all the time from teachers, especially veteran teachers, is I wish we could go back to the good old days. The thing is, we can't, right? We as teachers and adults have to come to them. And we have to understand their interactions, their social interactions. And so I tell teachers and administrators and parents all the time that you should become consumers of what your kids are consuming. Like, I listen to the same music my 11-year-old daughter does. I don't necessarily like it, but I want to know what she's listening to. I know all the apps, or at least my undergraduate and graduate students know all the apps, and then they tell me about them. So, I stay on top of that. But, becoming a consumer of what kids are consuming is important, because we have to go to them. Because their behaviors and their experiences, especially electronic experiences, continue to evolve. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time with risk factors because we're already 20-some minutes into this, but often just being different in a noticeable way can be a risk factor. And one thing that we're getting ready to talk about for the next probably 40 minutes or so, however long we have, is this idea of social and communication skills. The question was asked of me today, why we focus so much on social and communication skills. And this is why, because most of the literature is suggesting some level of social or communication skill deficit is what's predictive of bullying involvement. And you compound that with any of the identity stressors, and it becomes even more challenging. And you can see, if you want to know warning signs, I do have slides for this. I'm not going to go through it because I want to make sure that we get to the interventions. But if you go to stopbullying.gov, they have a nice list of warning signs. They have warning signs for being victimized. They have warning signs for engaging in bullying. They also have warning signs for cyberbullying. So, now, I've been studying bullying among youth with disabilities for 15 years, and this slide right here is a culmination of all my work. This is it. One slide. That's all you need. One slide. This is what we've been doing for 15 years to determine why kids with disabilities experience higher rates of victimization. And you know what we found? We found that everything matters. Their disability identity, their disability characteristics, their class placement, the severity of their disability, how they receive their services, where they receive their services, the type of services they're receiving, all that stuff matters. So within disability, we think about like the identity intersectionality or the service intersectionality. And so we have to think as those things compound, kids get more or less at risk. And so, but what we do know is kids with disabilities tend to experience higher rates of victimization over time. I believe that we're one of few that have collected longitudinal data on kids with disabilities, and we've determined that not only do they experience higher rates of victimization over time, that gap also never closes. Which tells me that we're not doing a fantastic job at skill development. Same thing with perpetration. That gap never closes. Now, but we're sending a message to kids. We're sending this message to kids that we don't believe them or that we don't know what to do. We tell them to come tell us, but they're like, why? Why? But we also know simple things, simple strategies can help us, right? We can listen. We can check in. We can give them advice. We can increase our supervision in high-risk areas, right? We can do simple things, and we know those things work. It's like as we move into this section on interventions and understanding these things, simple things also work, okay? We're going to go through some complex stuff, but these things also work. Because really, bullying is a matter of perception. Everybody in here is listening to the same thing. And everybody in here is going to leave and internalize this differently. Some of you are going to leave and say, man, that was the best thing I ever heard. Some of you are going to leave and say, this guy is a no-talent hack. Why'd I waste my hour? Because we internalize experiences differently. And it's no different than bullying. What we have to do is we have to validate kids' experiences. So it doesn't matter how any of you define bullying in here or anybody watching or I define it. What matters is that kid standing in front of you, because that was their lived experience. And if we find out it truly wasn't bullying, we lead them down that path, right? We explain it to them, and we kind of lead them in the right direction of understanding how to navigate that social situation. But if it was bullying, then we got to do something about it. All right, so I'm going to go through our theoretical framework. We talked a little bit about this to the scholars earlier. But I believe you increase social and communication skills, you decrease bullying involvement. Now, this looks very complex. This is the model that I work with all of our school partners on intervention. And it's really not all that complex, but it just looks a little bit more complex, okay? So we're gonna scale this back a little bit, and we're gonna go through assessment, universal, targeted, individualized, okay? Because PBIS is not an intervention, it is an intervention delivery framework. So these multi-tiered systems of support are frameworks for delivering interventions. This is the one we're going to work from, okay? And we're going to start right here. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time with screeners and assessments because it's probably the most boring piece of all this, but it's a necessary piece. So the first thing that I encourage all schools to do is build a task force. This task force should be decision and process driven, collaborative, with shared leadership. Even if administration's on this, it should have shared leadership. And people should recognize and understand their bias and other risk factors. And then we bring multiple perspectives together. This is how we create our team. Now, all these people should be on the team, or at least some representation here should be on the team. Now, one thing I want to make clear is I don't have parents or students up here. The reason why I don't have parents and students up here is because some confidential information can be coming out from this team, right? Bullying reports can be made to this team. So that's why they're not on my task force. Not to say there's not room for them or place for them, or there can be a different way for them to help this task force. Just in this particular scenario, they're not on this team. Now, all these responsibilities of this task force. So But ultimately, the responsibility of this task force is to assess the school climate, establish an intervention protocol for all tiers, establish a reporting and investigation protocol, and establish a data collection system to make sure that things that they're doing are working. Okay, so the next section is really looking at screeners. Screeners are what we do at the beginning of each school year and at the end of each school year to identify students that may need added support. There are all sorts of screeners. So we've done a content analysis, and most screeners include these domains: pro-social behaviors, motivation, emotional behaviors, peer interactions, and physical behaviors. Most screeners include some component of those 5 domains to determine whether or not a kid needs additional support. We focus on social and communication skills that fall within peer interactions, emotional behaviors, motivation, pro-social behaviors. And then obviously we're going to make sure that kids aren't engaging in physically aggressive behaviors. Okay, so there we go. That takes us through assessment and screeners. If you want any access to screeners or have any questions about kind of what screeners look like, please let me know, and I would be happy to send you any of that information. Okay, so we're going to, I do have to say that it is a little bit more taxing to speak through this mask now. I'm like, I thought I was in pretty decent shape, but, oh, buddy. All right, so we're going to talk about universal level prevention. This is the foundation of any bully prevention initiative. This is what we should be doing for all students. Every student should have access to this level of prevention, okay? Now, I'm going to tell you my philosophical approach first. For full disclosure, I've been in this long enough, I don't need to hide it anymore. For full disclosure, I'm a full inclusionist. I believe that all kids should be included in the general education environment with the appropriate supports. I believe that's doable. I believe that it doesn't take any more resources. All it does is take a little bit more training and time management. But to me, I'm going to tell you the reason why is I used to be a teacher. I used to work with kids that primarily had behavior disorders. And it doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense for me to take a kid with a behavior disorder, put that kid into a classroom full of other kids with behavior disorder, and expect him or her to come out better on the other side. That makes no sense conceptually, right? Even if you have the greatest teacher in the world, which typically the teachers in those environments are first or early career teachers, it makes no sense, right? The most challenging classroom. And then what we do is we take these kids and we put them in these self-contained environments when they're very young, once they're first identified, and then they're in self-contained classes in elementary, middle school, and then by the time they get to high school, they're in credit-bearing classes, and they have to pass them to graduate. But we set them up for failure. That makes no sense. And it's not their fault. We made that decision for them as adults. So, again, full disclosure, I believe in inclusion because I believe the kids learn, practice, and validate their social skills among their same-age peers at a more rapid rate in an inclusive environment. And I believe when we exclude them, we do damage to their social and communication skills. All right. Now, we're talking about social skills, and I know that some people think that we just took a hard shift from talking about bullying prevention to talking about social and communication skill acquisition, but actually we're talking about the same thing. I believe, again, if we address this hidden curriculum, the social rules and norms that everybody seems to know but aren't directly taught, if we address this hidden curriculum, we'll address at least a large part of our bullying in our schools. I believe that. Because nobody really knows how they were taught these social rules and norms. So we're going to get to the bottom of it. Now, some of you have heard me talk about this all day, and I think that this was a large majority of our conversation earlier today. So I hope revisiting it isn't too bad. But I believe we should be embedding social and communication skills into our daily curriculum. I don't think it's that hard. Like, I don't think it's that challenging for us to take a math lesson, have kids work in groups in a math lesson, and have an objective in that lesson that is collaboration. You learn algebra, and you learn problem solving, right? You learn algebra, and you learn collaboration. You learn algebra, and you learn responsible ways to ask for help. To me, it doesn't sound too complicated. And I mean, when I was teaching, I taught secondary math. And I always had a piece that included social or communication skills, always. Now, bear in mind, I taught kids with disabilities, but also I taught a standards-based math class, meaning that for those of you who remember highly qualified, I mean, not to brag, but I was highly qualified. I was highly qualified to teach math. So my math classes allowed me to give general education credit to my students, but they all had disabilities, and they all demonstrated that they couldn't pass math in a general education environment, not due to anything academically, but due to behavioral challenges. So I always had one. It wasn't that challenging. So I think as long as we can work with teachers to learn how to do it, then we'll be better off. All right. But even beside that, what all kids need to know at the universal level, regardless of if you have PBIS, if you have second step, if you have some homegrown character education, what kids need to know is what to do, what to say, who to tell. And I mean, that sounds a little juvenile, but you can like make it fancier, you know, and like make it more age appropriate. But like, I'm just peeling back the layers, right? Kids need to know what to do if they see or experience bullying. They need to know what to say if they see or experience bullying. And they need to know who to go to. Those are the three things. But on the back end of that is if we're teaching kids that, we also need to teach us as adults how to support somebody who is victimized. We need to teach us as adults how to respond to the reported bullying behavior and also protect anyone who's making those reports. Now, I realize that wasn't a whole heck of a lot at universal level systems, but that's the crux of it, right? We embed social emotional learning at the universal level. We identify things that we do for all kids. We state them in a positive way. And we teach kids what to do, what to say, who to tell. And we use our team to identify what we are going to do to respond to the bullying, what we are going to do to support the kid who's been victimized, and how we are going to protect the reporter. All right. Now, we're going to go into where I spend a lot of time as a researcher. This is where most of my work has been happening. I've been working with targeted interventions for a long time now. Now, the way I just want to take you down the path of how we get here, right? So we tell all schools that they should do a school-wide climate assessment in the fall, 1 month into school, and in the spring, 1 month before school closes. If anybody's interested in the school-wide climate assessments that we use, I'm happy to share those. Every scale and construct that we use is open source, so I'm happy to share all that. So then we also encourage all schools at the beginning of the school year at least to use the behavioral risk screeners, the screeners that I just kind of buzzed through. Now, I'm going to tell you that Just throw out some names of screeners that we have used. We've used the Social Skills Improvement System. We have used the SABRS, which is the Social, Academic, Emotional Behavior Rating Scale. And we've used homegrown behavioral rating checklist. And we've used all those to primarily identify kids that have social and communication skill deficits. Once we identify those kids, those are the kids that we're talking about at this tier. Now, historically, what we've done is we've ended up with about, 11 to 13% of our population is where we've been for this group. And so what we typically will do is we'll typically provide instruction within groups of 6 to 8 at grade level. Okay? Now, in these next few slides, I'm separating them out kind of. So in the first few slides, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what we can do in the classroom. And I get it. Some people would argue classroom interventions are universal interventions. I understand. But I also view classrooms as a smaller environment within a school context, because I don't know about you, but I've walked around many schools, and classroom A is not the same as classroom B. Teacher A does not have the same classroom management skills as teacher B. So I think they're different. Now, the one thing that I encourage all teachers to do is think about their lesson planning and make universally designed lessons. So what are we going to do when we think about social and communication skills? We're going to think about those kids that are struggling with social and communication skill acquisition. And we're going to be planful in how we're going to provide them with instruction prior to providing them with instruction. We're going to think and create our lessons as opposed to just creating our lessons, because that's the next chapter in the book. The next piece is we're going to use differentiated instruction. Differentiated instruction for all students. Meaning that if we have a kid that's struggling with social communication skills, let's say peer interactions, we're going to think about when we design our lessons to focus on peer interactions for that student and provide that student with behavior-specific or positive-specific praise. Then we're going to encourage extracurricular participation, and I know some of you are looking at me thinking we just spent about 45 minutes talking about extracurricular activities. It's a long story, but hopefully next time I come back and talk, I'll have more information. But I still do really encourage extracurricular participation. Just a synopsis of what we're finding now. Kids that are involved in 2 or more activities, they tend to be less involved in bullying than kids that are only involved in sports or not involved at all. So what we encourage our students to be involved in 2 or more different types of activities. Rules. It's important for us to have classroom rules, and I'm talking about rules for bullying. So I encourage teachers to define what bullying is in their classroom. I encourage teachers to determine what their response is going to be. And also, I encourage teachers to make sure they're reinforcing what to do, what to say, who to tell. Now, if you leave with nothing other than this slide from me today, then I think I've done my job. This slide, even though it looks super simple, this slide is everything we need to know about building skills, teaching skills. We give kids precorrects or prompts, right? We tell them what we want them to do. We demonstrate it, we show it, we tell them. Then we give kids opportunities to do that. And then when they do that, we provide them with behavior-specific praise. And I say this the way I say it because it sounds so simple. It sounds so simple, but really it is not. Because we do a good job with this. I wish my little pointer worked. Here it goes. We do a good job with precorrects. We do a good job with opportunities to respond. But when it comes to positive specific feedback or behavior specific feedback, we don't do a very good job. Because it's unnatural for us to tell kids, hey, I really like the way you're meeting the expectations that you should be meeting anyway, is the responses that I get, right? And we don't have to do this for everybody, but we have to change the way we communicate with our kids to be able to use behavior-specific praise and say, I really like the way you are, or you should be very proud of the way you are, and be specific. And use less corrective feedback, and even less, punitive responses. Don't do that. Stop doing that. Let's use reinforcement, behavior-specific praise, and less of the stop doing that stuff. All right. There are all sorts of different ways that we can prompt or pre-correct. It's just important that we do it. It's important that we tell kids what our expectations are. Now, I'm looking at the time, and I don't have a lot of time to go through our group contingencies, but I want you to think clearly about how you do like token economy systems. I'm going to give you just a few things. Number one, not all tokens have to equal the same thing for the same kids, right? Some kids, tokens can equal 2 tokens. Other kids, they can equal 1. Those kids that are successful in token economy systems aren't the kids that we're typically talking about, right? So you don't have to turn the tokens in at the same time for everybody. Some kids need to turn them in more rapidly than others. And the tokens don't have to mean the same thing for everyone. They don't have to earn the same thing for everybody. For those kids that are really struggling, those tokens should earn reinforcers to improve the behavior that we're focusing on. Now, the next targeted intervention that I would encourage you to do is look at your cooperative learning groups and restructure your cooperative learning groups to where you use behavioral momentum, meaning that you have kids engaging in tasks that you know that they can complete, and then you build up some confidence, and also peer modeling. So when you create your cooperative learning group, you pair a kid with low social skills to a kid with stronger social skills, and you provide behavior-specific praise when they engage in the behaviors that you're looking for, and you can use peer modeling. So the kid that has strong social skills, you provide behavior-specific praise. The kid that has lower social skills, sitting right next to them, sees that they're getting praised or getting reinforced, they have a higher likelihood of engaging in that behavior. Now, the other thing that we have, just since I work with traditionally minoritized groups, I want you to make sure that we're looking at who those groups may be and making sure that you recognize that some subgroups of youth are more at risk for being involved in bullying than others. Therefore, we have to make sure that we recognize that and provide them with a skill set that allows them to respond. Okay, so now we're going to move into our small groups. These are groups that we'd pull out and provide direct targeted instruction to. This is our structure for our social skills lessons. So we will introduce a skill, demonstrate the skill, role play the skill, reinforce the skill. So give behavior-specific praise. So right now what we've done is prompted, gave a kid opportunity, engaged in behavior-specific praise. Then this generalized skill, we do something also pretty cool. When we're teaching kids social skills, we send out an email to the students' teachers, and we tell them, hey, we're working on, let's say, conversations this week. If you see Johnny engaging in appropriate conversation, you also provide them with behavior-specific praise, such as, and then we give them some examples. So we're able to generalize outside of our group. But the thing we have to realize is when we're teaching skills, and this can be any skill, we have to acknowledge that there are acquisition deficits, meaning that they don't have the skill that we're asking them to do. For example, if we ask a kid to raise their hand and they don't know how to do it, they're never going to raise their hand. They don't have that skill. It's acquisition deficit versus fluency deficit. They have the skill, they just don't reliably use it. This is important when teaching a skill to determine what the deficit is. Now, also important to teaching social skills is how the social skill presents or how the deficit presents in order to determine if the kid is struggling with their emotional response or their collaborative play or their verbal presentation, their nonverbal presentation. And these are the social skills that we tend to teach, these 10. And I will tell you, out of these 10, we will focus first on having conversations. I believe conversations are the building block of all social and communication skills. I believe that. But I also believe that we do a poor job in teaching kids how to engage in conversation, which is directly related to kids being involved in bullying because they don't know how to communicate with one another in an appropriate way. Because what we teach kids in terms of conversation is a very linear, authoritative way of conversing. You talk, I talk, you talk, I talk, you talk, I talk. Yeah, that's the way they talk to adults, right? They need to wait until you're done talking so then they can talk. But that's definitely not how they talk to their friends. It's not how you guys talk to your friends. Because here's what happens, right? You'll start talking and you'll say something that triggers your friend, so they'll start talking over you. And then you'll trail off with like because, and they'll talk, and then they'll trigger something that you want to say, so you'll start talking, but they're not finished, so they'll talk louder, and so you stop until you find another opening. But think about how we're teaching kids, especially kids with autism, right? Because kids, if we teach them this very linear pattern, then that's how kids are going to respond, and they're going to think it's weird that somebody's talking over them, or they're going to get angry, right? So conversations is where we start. And then we move around the circle, and we build on every skill. Oh, hey, I had a slide for that. All right, let's go quickly. We got a couple of minutes. Let's go quickly into individualized interventions. Now, some of you, those of you who are the scholars in the program, I'm sure that you talk about this, 4-term contingency, setting events, antecedents, behaviors, consequences. I bring that up because when we start and have kids that move into this tier, functional behavior assessment becomes necessary. Whether it's an FBA and behavior intervention plan, or whether it's just a functional worksheet that we have, so we have some brief FBAs, that becomes necessary. Now, what we encourage when it comes down to bullying, especially those who are chronically victimized or those who engage in chronic levels of aggressive behavior, we encourage the use of social narratives. Some of you know them as social stories. We encourage the use of these. And I think it's important to do. There are all sorts of different mechanisms by which you can create a social narrative. But having the student kind of navigate this situation through a different lens and having them come up with solutions is important. The next piece that we encourage is attention signaling. What this is just basically telling a kid if they have help, they can like tug on their ear, and it triggers you to come over and help them. Because we have a bad habit as adults in buildings to make kids look more helpless than they are. Think about those inclusion classes. Think about those co-taught classes where the special ed teacher walks around to all the kids with disabilities. You need help, you need help, you need help, and then they pass all the kids without disabilities, who may also need help, by the way. But what it does is it makes these kids look like they're dependent on adult support. And one of the other predictors of bullying involvement is the appearance of dependence on adult support. And then the other thing we do at Tier 3 is we encourage self-determination. We encourage the use of self-determination skills, which is providing kids with opportunities to make decisions, to teach kids how to solve problems, to incorporate self-management strategies, to teach a value system, and to teach goal setting. So we teach kids a value system, what they should value, what they should take pride in, who their friends are, what friendship actually looks like. We teach kids how to set goals. What are their academic goals? What are their behavioral goals? What are their personal goals? And we help kids get there. We are essentially empowering kids to take ownership of their experiences. Now, I was a high school teacher, and this is primarily what I would do with all of my kids, is I would work with them on these very things. And the final piece I have for you is, please, if you're writing IEP goals, do it right. I worked on an IEP quality project, and we were looking to see whether or not IEPs were substantive enough, and actually whether or not we could measure what the goal said we could. Now, IEPs can be used as a tool in bully prevention, especially if you incorporate goals related to behavioral functioning, social and communication skill acquisition. Okay? But when you write your goal, given this, the condition, this behavior will happen this many times, the criteria. And make sure that criteria that you write in there is measurable. Percentages are often not very measurable. This student will stay on task 80% of the time. What does that look like? You got a stopwatch out, making sure that's 80% of the time. That's hard. Trials, like 3 of 4 times, or 5 of 6 days. Things that are more finite are easier. Okay, conclusion. This is the message that my head football coach gave to me when I was playing football in college. And he is number six on the most wins in college football history. So I think he knows a little bit about success. And this is the message I send to a lot of kids. You know, we want to stop bullying. We want to address bullying. We want to acquire social and communication skills. But ultimately, what we need to do for success is do the right things, give your best effort, and have class. If those 3 things follow along with you for the rest of your lives, or your kids that you work with, or I tell my graduate students this too, then we'll be successful. But also, if we want to truly reduce or stop bullying in our schools, we have to believe these behaviors can be changed. And I will leave you with all my contact information. If you want to find me on any of or my team, not me, my team on any of these social media things, there we are. All right, I got 2 minutes for questions. And not a lot of time. Any questions? Yes, sir. Yeah, I think it's important for kids to experience multiple domains, and so our data are showing like kids that are in sports only engage in higher rates of bullying behaviors than any other subgroup other than kids that aren't involved at all. But kids that are involved in multiple domains, meaning they're involved in sports and art clubs, or sports and academic clubs, or sports and some sort of non-academic like student government club, they tend to not bully as much as others. So I think what happened is they get to learn, like from their competitive sport, they get to learn this team chemistry. And this is just all speculation because we're still kind of getting through this. But they get to learn all the benefits of engaging in competitive sports, but through other means like academic clubs, they get to learn more collaboration, cooperation on things that aren't highly competitive, if that makes sense. But we're still just kind of disentangling this. So I don't know, but all I know is our data say that if you're involved in 2 or more activities of different domains, sports, arts, academics, non-academic like student government, then you're better off. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah, you can have this PowerPoint. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, we're in middle schools. We have not tried it in high school. We just set a date for our first high school data collection, and so I'm excited about it. But we've done it in middle school, we've done it in high school, or we've done it in middle school, we've done it in elementary. We've done every iteration that so the way we figured out the timing is, did I mention the timing in here earlier? I think in here. The way we figured out the timing is we were doing a web-based intervention, and it was supposed to be individualized for kids, so like everybody had their individual logins and all this stuff on this program that we're using. And we went in, the first class we had was a kindergarten class, and like we had 45 minutes allocated for it. It took like 25 minutes to get all these kindergartners logged on to the system, 6 of them. And then we're like, oh, so we put them through this intervention, and then it extended past time, so we were there an hour trying to get them logged off like the last 20 minutes. So then I monitored how long their attention span was. So I don't know where that came from, but I thought it was just a good story. Any other questions? I think we're over time. Thank you. Don't forget to follow my Facebook group. My students will really appreciate it. They work hard on it.